Even if you're British, you're bound to see a fair bit of Abraham Lincoln. If you're a British PhD student working on Hollywood films of the 1930s, you will see a lot of Lincoln. And as time goes on, if you watch a lot of other and later Hollywood movies, you'll see him many times again.
Dreaming. I walked with Lincoln.
You might wake up one day and realise Lincoln has colonised a corner of your viewing. You might even start to see him in places he was never intended to be.
And you, Joe, look wonderfully well. Give me your hat.
What made me think of Joe Gargery wasn't the actual hat, which was surprisingly Lincoln-y when I sought this scene out again. It was the social awkwardness the hat was used to express. This made me think of Henry Fonda with his darling Clementine. Which made me think of Henry Fonda's Young Mr. Lincoln. And of Mr. Smith as he bumbled in Washington. Lincoln is many things in the cinema, but one of those things is awkwardness. North America's greatest president, according to its movies anyway, as awkward?
Oh, Father. Oh, dear me.
At the expense of some of the furniture, Susan, you've made another conquest.
Not old Honest Abe.
And with Honest Abe's ideals.
Well, what Lincoln was really like is not my concern here. I want to show you the uses Hollywood has made of his image. Lincoln will become a lens through which we can see a series of films differently, and hopefully I will move you to see Lincoln in many more places than you'd previously imagined. In my writing on the on-screen Lincoln, I use 3 categories: physicality, fortitude, and vision. Each captures a different but interlinking part of what Lincoln stands for and means. So with vision, I look at Lincoln's foresight. In Hollywood historical films, the greatest claim that can be made for the hero, for it is generally a he, is he was a great man ahead of his time. This is often performed through a gaze or through words that look beyond the immediate situation.
You young men, doctors and scientists of the future.
Lincoln, more than anyone, sees what is coming and sees what it is necessary to do. In the 1930s, for example, what film historians have called the decade of Lincoln, This ranges from the extreme portentousness of Walter Houston's near-direct address,
"But the Union shall be preserved,"
to the way Henry Fonda's gaze seems coloured by anxiety when his young Mr. Lincoln seems to have been transported forward through time to a White House balcony. In both cases, Lincoln looks forward and seems to foresee the history yet to come.
That's why I'd like to get the 13th Amendment through the House and on its way to ratification by...
With Fortitude, my focus is the Lincoln Memorial, which is a powerful symbol in Hollywood cinema. The strength of the seated figure and its fixed gaze is used in some films as something that morally conflicted heroes look up to or measure themselves against.
What would you do if you were asked to give up your dreams for freedom? What would you do if asked to make the ultimate sacrifice?
The Lincoln Memorial is fixed, stable, serene. Well, most of the time.
Abraham, freeze!
Freeze?
This is most unlike the physicality of the flesh and blood president Hollywood so often gives us. And this physicality will be my focus through the rest of this video essay. Physicality. The physicality of Hollywood's Lincoln is in some ways as we'd expect. Lincoln was famously tall, the tallest ever president according to most measures, and he was also famous for his strength. His ability to split rails is widely known and occasionally shown. More prominently, following Carl Sandburg's hugely influential and popular biographies of Lincoln in the 1920s and 30s, we see the legendary fighting prowess of his early years.
Now, gentlemen, I'm not up here to make any speeches. All I got to say is I can lick any man here, hands down.
I'm Big Buck, all right. I'm the biggest buck in this lick.
Well, come on up and whet your horns. What's the
Now, come on over here. I'm the big buck in this lick. Yeah, you are, eh? I'm the big buck of this lick. And any of you want to wet your horns, all you got to do is give that hat a kick.
This physical power is taken to Marvel-like extremes in Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. Lincoln's height is a question of morality too. It marks his physical power, but the way he inhabits that height marks his humility. We see this in the stooping that some famous screen Lincolns perform. In historical films, he is approximately the opposite of Napoleon Bonaparte, and more than one Hollywood film directly contrasts them. Whereas Lincoln is humble, magnanimous, and Christ-like in many Hollywood representations, Napoleon is, well...
You ditched Napoleon? Deacon, do you realize you have stranded one of Europe's greatest leaders in San Dimas?
He was a dick.
George Bailey, who I suggest in my writing carries a bit of Lincoln with him, along with Jimmy Stewart, is contrasted in It's a Wonderful Life with Potter, who has a Napoleon bust, plus slave figurines, as well as a narcissistic yearning for power and conquest. Other films mock the sizable differences between Lincoln and Napoleon.
So, the little tiny man who could not be a smaller or shorter mouse runs into the claws of the giant cat.
Wow, you're really hung up on the height, aren't you?
No, it's not about height.
No offense, I just, you're Napoleon was like a complex named after you. You're famous for being little.
This is your big rescue?
Oh, no. This is.
Rather than desperately desire to make himself bigger, and, invade Russia, the stooping is Lincoln bringing himself down to a more personable level. But his physicality sometimes goes beyond personability to be shown as something quite eccentric. In both Young Mr. Lincoln and Abe Lincoln in Illinois, which were released less than a year apart, we see him as a younger man, taking up positions that look uncomfortable, or at least not conventionally comfortable. In both cases he is reading, which marks him out from many of his poor or undereducated rural friends, neighbours and relatives. But the performance of this reading is down home, almost literally earthy.
Rights to acquire and hold property.
Abe?
Hello, Ann. Give me a minute to try and untangle myself.
The positions Lincoln takes in the 1939 John Ford film mark him out most clearly from the pompous future political and presidential rival, Stephen A. Douglas, who was also famously almost a foot shorter than Lincoln. However, it is D.W. Griffith's 1930 cradle-to-grave biopic that gives us the most striking moment of eccentric Lincoln physicality. The keenly ambitious and shrewish Mary Todd of this version is preoccupied with getting the White House in good order for company. But Abe just wants to get comfy. But he can't do that in this fussy upper-class furniture. At least not without making some adjustments.
Why, Mr. President.
Huh?
Crucially, this all suggests that Lincoln was not a good fit for the presidency. Well, what I mean more precisely is he was not a good fit for the professional political class, which the general public seem to have been just as cynical about in the last couple of centuries as they are now. And this connects with one of the most powerful myths of Hollywood representations of the 16th president, and historians tell us it is a myth.
That isn't the truth.
That is that Lincoln was impelled reluctantly by other people, particularly his wife, and by fate towards the presidency.
That I don't want to be ridden and driven onward and upward through life with her whip lashing me and her spurs digging into me. If her poor little soul craves importance in life, let her marry Stephen Douglas. He's ambitious too. I want only to be left alone.
While Lincoln's height enables him to display both power and humility, his eccentric physical posturing enables him to convey authenticity. An authenticity that, while lying on the ground, puts him metaphorically above the professional politicians who surround him. Let us probe a little more this authenticity when it manifests as awkwardness. Awkwardness overlaps with plain old clumsiness, though with significant differences. There is sometimes a clumsiness to Lincoln's physicality. But when we talk about awkwardness, we are talking about ill-fitting in a given social situation. Like clumsiness, it is always felt through or in response to a physical and/or social performance. However, it is the social situation that is perhaps the defining trait in making it feel awkward. There is plenty of awkwardness around Lincoln in Steven Spielberg's 2012 biopic. It is felt by other politicians intimidated by Lincoln's peculiar physicality. we also see it in the responses to the president's jokes and stories.
Thus fulfilling, for the bird at least, his prophecy.
No.
Very partial to.
No, you're going to tell a story. I don't believe that I can bear to listen to another one of your stories right now.
But Lincoln, with its focus on the well-established political operator, differs from some of the biopics that take a longer view of his becoming.
The part assigned to me is to raise the flag, which, if there be no fault in the machinery, I will do. And when up, it'll be for the people to keep it up. That's my speech.
We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more, from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore.
When he gives a short speech and winds a slightly squeaky hand crank with little concern for pomp, circumstance, or the performative flourish we'd expect of a statesman, the effect is disarming. He is here too confident, in his way, too at ease in himself to be awkward. However, in earlier representations of his earlier life, Lincoln is shown to be most awkward with women, especially Mary Todd, who is an upper-class woman.
Since all the dancing I've ever done was behind a plow.
Mr. Lincoln, I shall be very glad to dance this dance with you.
All three of the 30s biopics stage parties or dances where Lincoln and Todd will first begin their relationship. All three play these out as quasi-political spaces where Todd will recognise Lincoln's potential.
I can hardly believe it.
The dance party is an apt space to dramatise a tension between Lincoln's distinctiveness, distinctly awkward, and the privileged and etiquette-ruled world he has to navigate. These scenes all make a virtue of his awkwardness when compared with the pompous stiffness of Stephen Douglas.
Indian, I thought you were going to have that thing raised up.
It wouldn't have made any difference if you had. He'd have knocked over something else.
Mr. Lincoln is more at home in the backwoods than in the drawing room.
How do you do, Mr. Lincoln?
Well, so far I haven't been doing so well, thank you.
Never mind, Mr. Lincoln. I'm sure all the other gentlemen here envy you for being tall enough to break that chandelier.
Miss Todd, I want you to know that I resent that bitterly. Hello, Abe.
Evening, Steve.
Still got the same old coat on, eh?
I got kind of attached to it.
Seems a little short.
It'll be longer before I get another.
Abe is what you might call a self-made man.
Well, I guess my parents ought to take some of the blame.
When I first knew him, he was behind the counter selling whiskey and rum and intoxicating the customers with his own raw humor.
You see, Miss Todd, I was always behind the bar, and Steve Douglas was always in front of it.
Something tells me I shouldn't have started this.
So I said to Daniel Webster, you may stand where you like in Massachusetts, but you'll meet your downfall out here in Illinois.
I can understand why they speak of you as the little giant.
Even Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter stages the exact same scene.
Mr. Douglas, you know Senator Nolan, of course.
Ah, yes, Steve. Good to see you.
Have you heard this news?
Oh, yes. Yes, we're looking into it. Rest assured, this kind of lawlessness won't stand in the noble state of Illinois.
I came to Springfield looking for someone different, someone whose life was a bit more adventurous and well...
The comic book superhero version of Lincoln does not display such a level of awkwardness faced with Mary Todd. But it is still there as an echo. Along this line, it is worth spending some time on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It may not be a film in which the flesh and blood Lincoln is ever embodied, but he is present repeatedly in other ways, and is such a major part of the representation of Jefferson Smith, as played by James Stewart.
The house afire. Even went down to see Mr. Lincoln again. Saunders.
A young patriot recites Lincoln and Jefferson turned loose in our nation's capital.
He went down among the people, and there he found a nugget.
Smith displays an awkwardness I feel I can call Lincolnian, because it is an index of his innocence, his moral straightforwardness, his lack of pretense.
I can't help feeling that there's been a big mistake somehow.
This makes Susan Payne, glamorous daughter of the once idealistic, now corrupted Senator Joseph Payne, about as opposite a member of the opposite sex as you could have. The film has a streak of misogyny here, as men might be the deeply corrupt ones, but women are vacuous markers of that corruption, such as in the gaggle that greets Smith at the station.
Welcome, Senator. The wildlife around here is a little different from what you're used to. They wear high heels.
And most glaringly, at a party for the film's villain, Jim Taylor.
Well, which one of you girls wants this? What do you want it?
A scene that immediately precedes Smith's second on-screen visit to the Lincoln Memorial.
I'm to take him out and turn my glamour on for him. You sympathize, don't you, Saunders?
Saunders, played by Jean Arthur, stands apart from those other, mainly faceless women. But it has to be said, she is like one of the boys.
Well, cut it out, see?
Like Mary Todd, Susan Payne is a high society woman, but in this case one totally shorn of moral value.
How are the pigeons?
Oh, they're fine.
Oh, I've missed the dear little things.
But when Smith is faced with her glamorous wiles, he literally trips over himself. Susan Payne isn't just sophisticated, she is urbane. And like the country bumpkin Joe Gargery in Charles Dickens's Great Expectations, when he meets Pip, now elevated to the status of London gentleman, Smith doesn't know how to hold himself, or even in this case a phone, when he talks to Susan.
Holy mackerel. Hello? Oh, hello, Miss Payne. How are you? Yes. Fine. What? What, escort you? Well, yes. I'd be delighted.
No.
Like the Lincoln of many Hollywood films, Smith is greeted as a yokel by sophisticated DC society.
Yeah, they sure must have picked the prize dummy for... Say, wait a minute. That wouldn't be Daniel Boone. Say, mister, what's your name?
Jefferson Smith.
Oh, yes, speak.
The tension between urban and rural is another of the many things that Lincoln, this most significant of historical and cinematic figures, is made to play out.
Is anything the matter?
Oh, no. My dear Senator, it may be customary out on the prairie to take French leave of people and not show up for 5 hours.
Oh, I'm very sorry about that, Miss Saunders. You are Miss Saunders, aren't you?
Yes, I'm Saunders, and this is Mr. Moore, member of the press. Mr. Moore, meet the Senator.
I'm very happy to know you, sir.
Well, I see you cut your way through that forest.
Yeah.
The mention of the prairie and allusions to famous frontiersmen hacking through forested wilderness brings to mind images associated in the cinema, most of all with the Western. This is the genre in which a particularly American tension between the urban and the rural plays out. A detour via the valedictory western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, can help us better place Lincoln in this complex web of meanings and illusions. John Ford is probably, with Frank Capra, the classical Hollywood director most invested in exploring the Lincoln image. Lincoln only appears in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance briefly in one speech.
Yes, and Lincoln still live, immortals in the memory of man.
Mr. Chairman,
And on one wall. His portrait is placed pointedly in a moment that appears to comment on the topic of racial equality.
That all men are created equal. That's fine, Pompey.
I knew that, Mr. Rance, but I just plumb forgot it.
Oh, that's all right, Pompey. A lot of people forget that part of it. You did just fine, Pompey.
But the portrait has a more broadly significant role in a scene that is almost literally at the heart of the film, and metaphorically at the heart of the film's much-discussed tension between the archaic world of heroes and a modern, civilized world of men. These worlds are embodied by the film's main male characters, Tom Donovan and Ransom Stoddard.
Listen to me, Tom Donovan.
His putting a portrait on the wall of his classroom and the casting of the lanky James Stewart to play him are not the only things that link Ransom Stoddard to Abraham Lincoln.
Now, what kind of man are you, dude?
I'm an attorney at law.
He is like Lincoln before him in going from prairie lawyer to becoming an eminent Washington politician. Stoddard arrives in Shinbone with law books instead of guns, embodying values immediately in the starkest opposition to the villainy of Liberty Valance.
Law? Lawyer, huh? Well, I'll teach you law. Western law.
Like Lincoln, reading sets Stoddard apart from the settlers that surround him.
Books?
Yeah, in the last barrel.
Books. Well, you folks go in the store and help yourself. I'll go back and get the barrel. Blackstone's Commentaries. That's law.
Law. I knew that book was about something.
The scene in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance with the Lincoln portrait is centred on Stoddard's attempt to teach the populace to read. Stoddard understands literacy as fundamental to the progress of Western civilization and the rule of law. Disillusionment and brute necessity sees him question these ideals, but ultimately, these are the ideals that Ford's film shows will win out.
When force threatens, talk's no good anymore.
And the deaths of both Valance and Donovan will be key to its ambivalent view of historical progress. By the way, this scene is one of a few in the film that contains the Anne Rutledge theme, which Ford reused from Young Mr. Lincoln. Young Mr. Lincoln is like a Western in some ways. This film, Springfield, is not as wild as Valance's Shinbone, but it's not a million miles away. Springfield is like Shinbone, sometime between the early years we see in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and the later years that bookend the main narrative. They share some iconography, but also Western-like violence is never too far away in young Mr. Lincoln.
He came back. He's drunk. Where are they? Oh, beyond in that clearing. Right over there. I'm going with you. No, you and Sarah stay with the baby. He's gonna find me. He's gonna kill me, and I know he will. Oh, baby. Let's play.
Wait, stay right in that clincher. Stay in the clincher. Come on.
Out of there.
Come on, man, come on. That's it. Come on now. Look out, man. He got a gun.
Won't do it. Me either. I'll go to law first.
In various aspects of his law practice,
Gentlemen, did you ever hear about the time in the Black Hawk War when I butted two fellas' heads together and busted both of them?
Well, I'm willing if he is.
and in the famous near lynching scene, Lincoln can transcend the divisions that Ford would play out in Valance. Divisions between pre-civilized freedom, violence, passion, and civilization, education, and the rule of law. He can transcend these because he is an extremely muscular intellectual.
Put down that pole and listen to me. Get out of the way! By Jing, I said listen to me. By Jing, you will. Now, gentlemen, I'm not up here to make any speeches. All I got to say is I can lick any man here, hands down.
He can embody within a single figure the values represented by Stoddard and Donovan.
He takes down a certain book and looks into it.
He can achieve a more perfect union.
Just happen to hit on these words. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Why don't you put it down for a spell, boys? Ain't it getting heavy?
Though young Mr. Lincoln seems to suggest this to be quite a lonely destiny.
I reckon I'd just about die if I didn't kiss you, Mr. Lincoln.
Ain't you going back, Abe?
No, I think I might go on a piece. Maybe to the top of that hill.
Lincoln is something like what semioticians call a floating signifier. Some aspects of his image are pretty consistent. For example, Hollywood movies generally associate him with a clearly Christian vision of righteousness, humility, and the value of forgiveness. However, other meanings have waxed and waned through cinema history, particularly in terms of his relationship to US racial politics. My focus in this video essay has been on some important aspects on the edge of his representation that are relatively consistent, and consistent through a long stretch of Hollywood history and in different kinds of films. It's perhaps not surprising that a medium dependent on performing bodies in space, social interaction, and physical action should make so much of Lincoln's singular physicality. And it's a testament to his huge significance as an image that we might find traces of Lincoln, and even of a particular kind of Lincolnian awkwardness, in films in which no actor plays him. During the Obama years, there was a real resurgence in Lincolnian cinematic images. Where will we see Lincoln next?
You may remember me. Friends, one and all, I must now bid you an affectionate farewell.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grace of wrath